You know that feeling, right? When you feel like someone really gets you, like they see you for who you truly are. I think we all crave that.
We do. It's a fundamental human need, that feeling of being understood.
Yeah.
But honestly, how often do we really get that feeling? Not that often, I'd say, both with others and, if we're really honest, sometimes even with ourselves.
Okay, so how do we get better at it? At understanding people, I mean.
Well, it's interesting. The author David Brooks, he tackles this head on in his book, How to Know a Person.
How to know a person. Interesting title.
It is, and there's this great YouTube video that really breaks it down, and we're going to deep dive into it today.
Yeah.
Get ready, because there are some seriously thought-provoking insights in this one.
Okay, I'm intrigued. So where do we even begin with something as complex as, well, understanding people?
Well, Brooks doesn't sugarcoat things. He comes right out and says, we're in a crisis of connection.
A crisis of connection. Oof, that sounds intense.
Right. And the statistics he cites are pretty alarming. Loneliness is on the rise. We're seeing declining trust in institutions. Hate crimes are increasing.
Wow. So, like, what's going on? Why are we so disconnected?
Yeah. Brooks argues it's a breakdown in social cohesion, and it's impacting everything. Our personal well-being, the way we function as a society, I mean, it's everywhere.
You see it all the time, right? I mean, think about how divided things have become politically, just as one example.
Exactly. And people seem less and less inclined to get involved in their communities. Brooks even points to studies showing a significant decline in social trust, which is kind of foundational for, well, a healthy society.
I mean, it makes you wonder, is it technology? Is it social media? Or is there something, I don't know, deeper going on? Like something about how we're approaching relationships in the first place?
I think it's probably a mix of all of those things. But Brooks, he suggests that a big part of the problem is that we lack the skills to actually understand other people. Like, we're not equipped with the right tools to truly connect.
I see. So, like, we don't know how to connect, even if we want to.
Yeah, exactly. And he says we often get so caught up in our own heads, our own perspectives, that we just don't see the world through other people's eyes.
Okay, that makes sense. We're all kind of trapped in our own little bubbles.
And he introduces these two personality types, diminishers and illuminators. I think it's a really fascinating way to look at how we interact with each other.
Diminishers and illuminators, huh? Okay, I'm all ears. Tell me more about these two types.
So, picture diminisher. They're the kind of person who, often unintentionally, makes others feel small, less significant.
Oh, I know the type. They kind of suck the air out of the room, right?
Yeah. They might dominate conversations, always talking about themselves, or they dismiss other people's opinions, always trying to one-up everyone with their own experiences.
You know, it's almost like they feel threatened by other people's light, so they try to dim it down to make themselves feel bigger.
That's a great way to put it.
Yeah.
But then you have the illuminators.
Tell me about the illuminators. They sound much more appealing.
They are. Illuminators have this incredible ability to make others feel seen and valued. They're really good listeners. They ask thoughtful questions. They just create this space where people feel safe to be themselves, to be vulnerable.
It sounds like they're really good at seeing the good in others.
Exactly. Brooks actually talks about this technique called finding the good. It's about consciously looking for positive qualities in others, focusing on their strengths.
I love that. It's like choosing to see the best in people, even when they're not at their best.
And it doesn't mean you ignore problems or become naive. It's just a shift in focus towards appreciation and understanding. And, speaking of illuminators, Brooks gives a compelling example. Dr. Ludwig Gutmann. He was a physician who worked with paraplegics, and he totally revolutionized their care.
Gutman, I've heard that name. Didn't he help create the Paralympic Games?
He did, but even before that, he was doing amazing work. He had this radical belief that even with severe physical limitations, people could still live full and meaningful lives.
Instead of treating them as, I don't know, fragile or helpless, he encouraged them to be active, right? To push their limits and engage in sports and challenges.
Exactly. He saw beyond their disabilities and focused on their potential. He really helped create a whole culture of empowerment within the paraplegic community. I mean, that's a true illuminator.
It's incredible. It makes you realize how much impact we can have on others just by how we choose to see them and interact with them. Right? I mean, just imagine if we all tried to be a bit more like Dr. Detman.
It's inspiring, right? It's like he had this ability to bring out the light within others and help them shine.
So how do we do it? How do we become more like that, more illuminating? Because let's be real, we're not all naturally gifted illuminators.
Well, that's where Brooks introduces this concept of accompaniment.
Accompaniment. Okay, I'm listening.
So Think of it like walking alongside someone. You're not leading them. You're not trying to change their path. You're just there, offering your presence and support.
So, like, just being there for someone without judgment, without trying to fix them.
Exactly. It's about creating a space where they feel safe to be vulnerable,
Mm.
be authentic, and to know that they're going to be met with empathy and understanding.
I like that, creating a safe space. That's so important for real connection.
And Brooks shares this great story. It's about the writer Gail Caldwell and her friend Caroline. They formed a deep bond through, get this, dog training. They would spend hours in the woods together, observing their dogs and just talking, sharing their thoughts and experiences.
There's something powerful about those simple shared experiences. Just being present with someone, no pressure, no expectations, just connecting in the moment.
And it highlights something really important. True accompaniment often happens in those everyday moments. It's not about grand gestures. It's about being present, showing up consistently, and letting the relationship unfold organically.
So it's the little things that add up over time, being there for someone day in and day out in the small moments. But, it's not always easy. Brooks is honest about that. In fact, he talks about his own failed attempt at accompaniment with his son's baseball team.
Oh, what happened?
Well, he admits that his ego got in the way. Instead of just enjoying the experience with his son, he ended up trying to control things, like trying to give the coach unsolicited advice. He actually created more tension than connection.
I think we've all been there, right?
Yeah.
Where our own stuff, our insecurities or agendas gets in the way of really connecting with someone.
Totally. It's a good reminder that even with the best intentions, we don't always get it right. But, hopefully we learn from those missteps and try to do better next time.
Exactly. It's about showing up and being present and being open to learning from our mistakes.
Yeah.
And that brings us to another really interesting point that Brooks makes the idea that we each construct our own reality.
Oh, interesting. So, like, we each experience the world through our own unique lens.
Right. Our personal history, our beliefs, our experiences, all of it shapes how we perceive things. So even the same event can have totally different meanings for different people.
That's so true. I mean, it's like that quote, we don't see things as they are, we see them as we are.
Exactly. And Brooks uses a really powerful example to illustrate this point. It's the story of the French writer Emmanuel Carrère. Carrère was on vacation in Sri Lanka when the 2004 tsunami hit.
Oh, wow. What a terrifying experience.
It was. He and his girlfriend Ellen, they were both caught in the tsunami, but they survived. And yet, their experience of the event, the way they processed it and what it meant to them, was profoundly different.
I can only imagine going through something that traumatic would definitely shake you to your core.
It did. For Carrère, the tsunami really forced him to confront the fragility of life. It changed him. He went from being kind of self-absorbed to someone who was deeply attuned to the suffering of others. It also deepened his love and appreciation for Ellen.
Wow. That's profound. But I imagine his girlfriend might have had a different take on things.
She did. For Ellen, the experience was more about, well, just surviving. She focused on the practicalities, the immediate needs of getting to safety and making sure they were okay. She didn't really have the same kind of existential crisis that Carrère did.
Same event, two completely different realities.
Brooks also talks about a friend of Carrère's, a man named Jerome, who tragically lost his daughter in the tsunami. He was consumed by grief, desperately searching for his missing wife. It just goes to show that even within a shared experience, our individual responses and interpretations can be vastly different.
It's a reminder that we can never truly know what it's like to be in someone else's shoes, but we can try to understand, to be aware of the filters through which they see the world.
Exactly. And that understanding is, I think, a crucial first step towards building empathy and connection.
So if everyone's living in their own constructed reality, how do we even begin to bridge that gap? How do we have conversations that lead to genuine understanding?
Well, that's where Brooks's exploration of good conversations comes in. And by good conversations, I don't mean just surface-level chit-chat. He's talking about conversations that delve into the depths of human experience. Conversations where we listen with intention and speak with vulnerability.
Okay, I'm definitely interested in having more of those kinds of conversations. So tell me, how do we cultivate those deeper connections? What makes a conversation truly good?
Well, for starters, Brooks says it's about being fully present. Really paying attention to the other person. He says to think of it like an on-off switch with your attention. When you're listening, you're really listening. You're not multitasking. You're not thinking about your grocery list or what you're going to say next. It's about giving them that spotlight, that focused attention.
It's funny, right? We always think of a good conversationalist as someone who's witty or, has all the best stories. But maybe it's more about being a good listener.
I think so.
Yeah.
And Brooks also talks about making the other person the author of their story. It's about letting them lead the conversation. Not jumping in with our interpretations or trying to control the narrative.
Right. Like giving them the space to tell their story in their own way. Didn't Brooks mention something called looping? What was that about?
Oh, yeah. Looping. It's actually really simple but effective. You just repeat back what the other person said in your own words.
So it's like a chicken. You're making sure you're understanding them correctly.
Exactly. It shows you're paying attention, that you're trying to see things from their perspective. It can really help to diffuse tension and build trust.
It's like saying, I hear you. I'm trying to get where you're coming from.
And Brooks takes it a step further with something he calls the midwife model of conversation.
The midwife model. Okay, that sounds kind of out there.
I know, right? But it's a really interesting metaphor. He compares it to a midwife helping a mother give birth. You're not the one giving birth. You're not dictating the process. You're just there to support and encourage and guide.
So you're creating a safe space for the other person's thoughts and feelings to emerge.
Exactly. You're helping them articulate their truth, but you're not putting words in their mouth.
I like that. It requires a lot of trust in the process, doesn't it? Trust that the other person has their own wisdom and that you're there to help them find it.
And speaking of finding wisdom, Brooks highlights this great technique that his friend David Bradley uses. Bradley writes down simple questions on index cards.
Like what kinds of questions?
All things like, what are your goals? What are your skills? What does your daily routine look like? Basic stuff, but it gets people thinking.
So it prompts them to reflect on their lives from a new angle.
And Brooks says that even these simple questions can lead to some pretty profound realizations. It's about getting people to look inward and examine their own lives and, maybe uncover some insights they hadn't considered before.
It's like those big questions we all ponder, right? The ones about purpose and meaning. But instead of getting lost in the abstract, we're grounding those inquiries in the concrete details of our lives.
Exactly. And, while those big questions are great for prompting introspection, not all conversations are that deep. We also have to navigate those trickier ones, the ones where there's disagreement. Especially in today's world, those conversations can get really heated.
Oh, tell me about it. It seems like everyone's on edge these days, ready to jump down each other's throats over the slightest disagreement.
It's tough, right? And Brooks, he doesn't shy away from this. He talks about the challenge of having those hard conversations, the ones where we're talking past each other, stuck in our own echo chambers.
It feels like those conversations are becoming more and more common and more difficult.
Well, Brooks shares a personal anecdote about a panel discussion on race where he was a participant. He really felt out of his depth. He's a white man, and he was talking with a black woman who had dedicated her life to understanding racial dynamics. He realized in that moment just how much their lived experiences differed and how that impacted their perspectives.
It's a good reminder that we need to approach those conversations with humility, right? Recognizing that we don't have all the answers and that our own experiences shape our views.
And Brooks talks about the importance of understanding the other person's frame. It's like trying to understand their goals and motivations for being in the conversation. Like, what are they hoping to achieve? What are their underlying concerns?
It's about finding that common ground, right? Even if you don't agree on everything.
Exactly. And Brooks emphasizes that those hard conversations often go off the rails because we get stuck in attack mode or start labeling each other.
It's like we forget that we're talking to another human being.
Brooks suggests that instead of going on the attack, we should try to step back and clarify what we're actually trying to achieve in the conversation.
So you're not just trying to win the argument, you're actually trying to understand each other.
He even suggests that those moments when a conversation breaks down, those moments of rupture, can actually be opportunities for deeper connection if we approach them with the right mindset.
That's an interesting way to look at it. Instead of seeing disagreement as a threat, you see it as a chance to deepen your understanding of each other.
It's not easy, though. It takes a lot of patience and a willingness to let go of our egos. And it brings us to another crucial aspect of understanding people: the impact of trauma. Brooks talks about his friend Pete, a brilliant surgeon who struggled with depression.
It's so sad when you see someone who seemingly has it all, a successful career, a loving family, but they're struggling on the inside.
Pete's depression stemmed from some pretty serious childhood trauma, and Brooks admits that he didn't always know how to be there for Pete, He wanted to offer advice to fix things, but that just made Pete feel worse.
It's tough, right? Because you want to help, but you don't always know how.
And Brooks says he learned a lot from that experience. Sometimes the best thing you can do is just be present with someone who's hurting.
Yeah.
Just acknowledge their pain without trying to minimize it or offer solutions they're not ready for.
It's about being a safe harbor for someone, a place where they feel seen and heard and understood. And sometimes that means just sitting with their pain, not trying to rush in and fix it.
Exactly. Brooks says we have to understand the profound impact that our early experiences, especially traumatic ones, can have on our adult lives. When we're young, we develop these coping mechanisms to deal with adversity, and those patterns can become ingrained, affecting our relationships and our mental health for years to come.
It's like those experiences create a blueprint for how we interact with the world.
And while introspection can be helpful, he argues that it's often through genuine conversations, through sharing those stories, that we can start to unpack those deeper issues and move towards healing.
So how do we do it? How do we cultivate the kind of understanding that allows us to really connect with someone who's hurting? How do we see beyond those defense mechanisms and offer genuine support?
Well, Brooks says empathy is the key, and he breaks it down into three core components: mirroring, mentalizing, and caring.
Okay, mirroring, mentalizing, and caring. I'm taking notes. Break it down for me.
So mirroring is basically just reflecting back the emotions you see in the other person. It's about letting them know that you recognize and validate their feelings, that you're not judging them. It's like saying, I see you, I hear you, and what you're feeling is important.
So you're holding up a mirror to their emotional experience, helping them feel seen.
Right. Then you have mentalizing, which is about trying to understand the why behind their emotions. Like what experiences might be shaping their reactions? What beliefs are they operating from?
It's about trying to see the world through their lens, to understand their perspective, even if it's different from our own.
And the third component, caring, is about recognizing that the other person's needs might be different from our own and responding in a way that meets those needs.
So it's not just about feeling empathy, it's about acting on it, putting their needs first, even if it's uncomfortable or inconvenient for us.
Brooks also talks about how people vary in their capacity for empathy. Some folks are just naturally more tuned in to other people's emotions, while others might struggle to pick up on those subtle cues. And he introduces this concept of emotional granularity.
Emotional granularity, what is that?
It's basically the ability to differentiate between subtle shades of emotion. So someone with high emotional granularity might describe their feelings as anxious excitement or wistful nostalgia instead of just happy or sad.
It's like having a more nuanced emotional vocabulary, being able to pinpoint those complex feelings that we all have.
Exactly. And Brooks says that people who have this ability tend to have deeper relationships, greater social awareness. They're better at navigating complex emotional situations.
So it's like they're more emotionally intelligent.
In a way, yes.
Yeah.
And he makes another interesting observation about highly empathetic people. They tend to be more nonconformist.
Really? So they're less swayed by social pressure.
They are. It's like they have this internal compass that guides them. They're not afraid to stand up for what they believe in, even if it means going against the grain. They're more attuned to what feels right to them and less concerned about what other people think.
That's interesting. So empathy is not just about being nice or feeling sorry for someone. It's about being true to yourself, being authentic.
And it can be a powerful force for positive change in the world. Brooks also delves into how suffering can shape us. He doesn't just focus on the pain, but on the potential for growth and transformation that can come from those difficult experiences. He talks about the writer Frederick Buechner. Buechner and his brother lost their father to suicide when they were young.
That's incredibly difficult, losing a parent that way.
It was. And the Buechner brothers, they didn't really deal with the full weight of that loss for a long time. They avoided it. But as they got older, they started to grapple with the complexities of their father's life. They started asking questions, trying to understand why he did what he did.
It can be hard to face those painful memories, to reopen those old wounds.
But Brooks says that's often where the healing begins. For the Buechner brothers, it was through sharing their stories and talking about their father that they were able to come to terms with his death and find some measure of peace.
It's a reminder that we're not alone in our suffering, and that talking about those painful experiences, sharing our stories, can be a path to healing and connection.
Exactly. And from there, Brooks takes us into the world of personality. He goes beyond those surface-level personality tests and dives into the big 5 personality traits: extroversion, conscientiousness, neuroticism, agreeableness, and openness.
Okay, give me the rundown on these big five traits. What are they all about, and why should we care?
Well, extroversion is basically about how outgoing and social you are. So some people are energized by being around others, while others prefer quiet time alone.
I'm definitely more of an introvert myself. I need my alone time to recharge.
Me too, actually.
Huh.
And then you have conscientiousness.
Yeah.
That's about being organized, responsible, disciplined. It's about following through on your commitments.
Right, like being the kind of person who always shows up on time and remembers to send thank you notes.
Exactly. Then there's neuroticism, which is basically how prone you are to experiencing negative emotions like anxiety or worry.
So some people are just naturally more sensitive and reactive to stress than others.
Right. And then you have agreeableness, which is about being cooperative, empathetic, and kind. It's about valuing harmony and putting others' needs before your own. And finally, openness, which is all about your willingness to try new things, to embrace new ideas, and to be intellectually curious.
So knowing where we fall on these different traits can help us understand ourselves better. And maybe even help us understand why we clash with certain people. Like that coworker who drives you crazy with their constant nitpicking.
It could be. Maybe they're high in conscientiousness and you're more laid back. Understanding those differences can really help to smooth things over in relationships.
It's like speaking different languages, but once you learn to translate, you can actually start communicating.
Exactly. And Brooks also points out that these traits, they're not set in stone. They can change over time, especially with conscious effort. We can learn and grow and develop new ways of being in the world.
So it's nature and nurture, not one or the other. That's good to know. Makes me feel like I have more control over, well, myself.
We do. We all do. And then Brooks takes us on this journey through the different stages of development we go through in life. He talks about Erik Erikson's work. Erikson had this theory that we face different psychological challenges at each stage, starting from infancy all the way through old age.
Like we're constantly leveling up, facing new challenges, gaining new wisdom as we move through life. I like that analogy.
Right. Each stage has its own set of tasks, things we need to master in order to move on to the next level.
So like what are some of the biggies, the challenges we face at different ages?
Well, in early childhood, it's all about developing that sense of trust in the world, trust in our caregivers that they'll be there for us, that they'll meet our needs. If that doesn't happen, it can create a lot of anxiety and insecurity down the line.
Makes sense. You need that solid foundation to build upon.
Right. And then as we move into adolescence, the focus shifts to identity. It's all about figuring out who you are, where you fit in, experimenting with different roles, testing
Oh,
boundaries.
the teenage years, full of angst and rebellion, but also a lot of growth, right?
Totally. And then young adulthood is about intimacy, forming those close, meaningful relationships. That involves vulnerability, trust, a willingness to let someone in. And then in middle age, it becomes more about generativity, contributing to society, making a difference in the world, leaving a legacy. And finally, in late adulthood, the task is to reflect on your life, make peace with your choices, and hopefully arrive at a sense of wholeness and fulfillment.
Wow, when you lay it all out like that, it's quite a journey, isn't it? I mean,
Mhm.
we're always evolving, always growing, hopefully.
Exactly.
Oh.
And Brooks also points out that we can get stuck in a particular stage. Like if we haven't fully resolved the tasks associated with that stage, it can hold us back in other areas of our lives.
So like someone who's constantly seeking validation, always needing to be the center of attention, they might be stuck in that adolescent phase of needing to prove themselves.
That's a great example. Or someone who's fixated on their career, always striving for more success, they might be neglecting other important aspects of their lives, like relationships or personal growth. It's about recognizing those patterns and finding ways to create more balance.
So awareness is key, right? Recognizing where we're at and what we need to work on.
Brooks then shifts gears a bit and talks about the importance of storytelling, how the narratives we create about our lives shape our identities and how we see the world. He mentions a psychologist named Jonathan Adler, who talks about two different modes of thinking, the paradigmatic mode and the narrative mode.
Okay, two modes of thinking. Explain that one to me.
So the paradigmatic mode, it's like thinking like a scientist, right? It's analytical, logical, fact-based. But then you have the narrative mode, which is more about weaving together our experiences and emotions to create meaning.
It's like we become the authors of our own lives, shaping our experiences into a story that makes sense to us.
Exactly. And Brooks says that when we interact with others, we often shift into that narrative mode. It's how we connect, how we build empathy, how we share our humanity.
It's like that saying, everyone has a story, and every story is worth listening to, right?
And Brooks explores different types of life stories, the quest narrative, where the protagonist sets out on a journey, faces challenges, and emerges transformed. The redemption narrative, about overcoming adversity and finding meaning in suffering, and the contamination narrative, where a good thing turns bad, leading to disillusionment or betrayal.
Wow, those are powerful archetypes, and I can see how they play out in people's lives.
Right. And he argues that those narratives, the stories we tell ourselves, they have a huge impact on how we see ourselves in the world.
So we need to be mindful of those stories, to question the ones that aren't serving us, to rewrite the script if we need to.
Exactly. And he makes this fascinating point about how talking to strangers could be so powerful. He says we're more likely to shift into that narrative mode with strangers.
Really? Why is that?
Well, because there's less pressure, I think. With people we know, there are all these expectations, these roles we play. But with strangers, there's more freedom.
Like a blank slate. You can be more authentic, more open.
And that openness can lead to some really profound connections and insights. And finally, Brooks wraps things up by talking about the importance of culture and wisdom. He says we can't truly understand someone without understanding their background, the values that have shaped them, their worldview.
It's about seeing the whole person, right? Not just the parts that we agree with or understand.
And he challenges that traditional view of wisdom as something that comes solely with age. He says true wisdom is about being open to new perspectives, even those that challenge our own beliefs.
It's about being humble, realizing that we don't have all the answers, that we always have more to learn.
And he emphasizes the importance of receptivity, creating that space where others feel safe to share their thoughts and feelings without fear of judgment. It's about really listening with an open heart.
It's about recognizing that everyone has something to teach us.
And Brooks concludes by saying that, even after all these years of studying human connection, he still struggles with his own ego and insecurities. He's still a work in progress.
It's good to remember that we're all on a journey. There's no finish line when it comes to self-awareness and understanding.
Well, I think that about covers it for our deep dive into how to know a person.
Wow, so much to think about. I really appreciate you walking us through all of that. I feel like I have a whole new set of tools for navigating my relationships.
It's really about being intentional about it, about making the effort to truly see and understand the people around us.
And ourselves. It all starts with self-awareness.
Okay, folks, that's it for our deep dive today. As always, thanks for listening, and we'll catch you next time.